we've talked a little bit about erosion before. We're going to talk about some more examples of erosion. Okay? And just as a reminder, erosion is the movement of weathered materials on the Earth's surface by wind, water, or ice. Okay? When the broken down pieces of rock and soil move around because of the wind, the water, or the ice, that is erosion. Okay? We're going to review weathering and weathered materials here in a minute. Okay? But we're going to look at some examples of erosion. Okay? A few examples of erosion we talked about before were things like sandstorms. Okay? And remember, all that blowing sand is the movement of those rock particles, the weathered broken down rock particles, and carrying it away. Rivers can also cause erosion. The land that's on the side, the soil and the rocks that are on the side on the bank of a river that get washed downstream, those are great examples of erosion. That's that movement of that weathered material. Glaciers can cause erosion. As they move across the land, they can cause that land to stay with the ice and move. And that's any kind of movement of that weathered material, okay, that's been broken down, any kind of movement of that is erosion. Now we're going to talk about weathering. Okay? Weathering, you break me up. Weathering is the breakdown of rock into smaller particles from the effects of wind, water, and ice. Rock slides are a geological change we've talked about before, but they are actually weathering as well. The effects of gravity pulling down rocks off of the side of the mountain, as shown here, cause them to weather or to break down into smaller pieces. You can see what's left of a big piece here and all these little pieces that have broken off from this big piece, or this, you can even say from this big mountain part over here. Weathering has caused this rock sculpture to form. Okay? We've talked about in class how a sandstorm can blow the sand and how it feels on our skin, that stinging sensation. Well, over long periods of time, that sand wears away at the rocks, and it creates these formations out in the desert and other places. River rocks. If you've ever felt or picked up any kind of river rocks, hey, they feel a lot different than regular rocks. Hey, river rocks are very smooth. Hey, and that's because the river rushing picks up the rocks and moves them, and they bump into each other. Essentially, it rounds off all the sharp, jagged pieces that we usually see when we think of rocks. Okay? And so it bumps and it bumps and it bumps, and it wears away the little pieces, and it breaks them down until they get to where they're smooth. Freezing and thawing is what we saw in the brain pop video before, where cracks form in the rocks. Water, when it rains, gets in there. And when it freezes, when the temperature drops, that water expands. And when that water expands, it pushes the rock and can make the crack deeper and wider. Then the water will thaw, which means it'll turn from ice back to a liquid water. And it can either run out, or if it's trapped in there, it'll stay in there. And the next time it freezes again, it'll get thicker and longer and create that rock, that crack, until it completely breaks off a piece of the rock because it's cracked it through all the way. Here's another example where you can see that the water has gotten in here and cracked and froze and cracked, and the water gets in and freezes and cracks, and the pieces of the rock are falling apart because of the water freezing and expanding. Acid rain is another thing that causes erosion. When pollution mixes in the formation of clouds through our water cycle, and that pollution mixes in the clouds, and it actually rains down. And that instead of it being water that normally rains down, it's a very weak acid. And the acid, after many, many rainstorms and many times being exposed, it starts to wear away and break down and weather rocks and rock formations. And these are actually, the picture here is sculptures that have been worn down, but they're made out of rock. And so the same thing happens in nature. Plant roots can actually cause erosion to happen. When trees or other small plants start growing in a rock, their roots continue to reach down and grow and push, and they can actually get in there, and as they grow, just like the water that expands, they cause those cracks to get bigger and bigger until eventually the rocks can break completely apart, or little pieces can just continue to break away from them. Burrowing animals can cause weathering to happen. The sharp claws that they use to dig their homes with can break rocks into pieces. Okay? They can scratch off pieces of rock, and they can break smaller rocks into smaller and smaller pieces and weather them down. Humans can also cause weathering to happen. This is a picture of a quarry. That's where men and women go in with machines, and they'll cut out pieces of the big rock formations into smaller and smaller pieces. They will weather them. Okay? It's breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces. And then we'll use them for things like the sculptures you saw before with the acid rain on them. Or depending on what kind of rock it is, like granite, if you ever have a granite countertop in your kitchen or bathroom. Also like marble, we use that for flooring, and marble pillars on big fancy houses and things like that. So humans can actually cause weathering to occur. Hey, now get out your science notebook. You're going to put your date in the corner on page 34. Your title is Erosion versus Weathering. Okay, we wrote the definition for erosion on the bottom of page 33. But right here I want you to write the definition of weathering. The breaking down of rock into smaller particles due to wind, water, and ice. Okay, and from the video that you watched before, I want you to list, you're going to draw a Venn diagram at the bottom, and you're going to list examples that are erosion, examples that are weathering, and anything that could be both. Okay, for example, a rock slide could be considered both, because not only does the movement of the rock sliding down break them down into smaller pieces, it is also causing those pieces to move, which is what erosion is. They're moving down their hill or their slope of their mountain into a new location, and they're being broken down into smaller particles. So a rock slide would be both. Okay? If you need to review through the video and figure out which examples go where, and we'll hopefully get a chance to talk about that in class tomorrow.